In America, a prominent doctor named Benjamin Rush had other ideas about what a prison should look like. He believed prisons should remove not only the dangerous people from society, but also they should try to reform inmates into law-abiding citizens. With that in mind, the Quakers helped establish the first true prison in America, called the Walnut Street Jail, a place where inmates would do penance. Hence the term penitentiary was created.
It consisted of a series of large rooms, but as the Walnut Street Jail became seriously overcrowded, they planned to build a large prison, now a state prison.
This resulted in the construction of Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which adopted the Quaker philosophy of punishment by solitary confinement. It later became known as the Pennsylvania system. Eastern was a radical departure in prison architecture. This floor plan shows its radial cell block design.
So the design was set up in this hub and spoke manner in order to improve supervision of the inmates and thereby prevent escapes.
The philosophy behind Eastern was to keep the inmates separate from each other, to prevent them from forming gangs and organizing riots or escapes. When a prisoner first arrived, he was escorted to his cell with a hood over his head, so that he could not see the other prisoners or where he was going, and they in turn could not see him.
The prison was designed in the way it was to ensure that the prison could carry out its philosophy of solitary confinement for all of the inmates.
By 1820 standards, Eastern was massive, with nearly 11 acres inside its walls. The outside wall was 1/2 mile around and 8 feet thick at the base. Eastern was one of the first prisons to build towers. The front building was 200 feet long, with a square tower turret at each end. It also had a guard tower on the roof of its central rotunda.
The cells were quite large enough that an inmate would not only have his living space, but also room for a workbench, a loom, machinery, tools, raw materials, whatever he needed in order to do his assigned work, which could be everything from weaving or dyeing cloth, making shoes, caning chairs, things of this nature. It all was done in the individual cell.
But the hub and spoke architecture of Eastern Penitentiary had many design flaws.
It was expensive to design, build, and operate a prison of this kind because the rooms, the individual cells, had to be so large. And also because having the inmates by themselves, working by themselves, they could not take advantage of the techniques of factory production. So there was less opportunity to make money for the inmates to produce revenue for the institution.
A different approach towards prisons was taken in neighboring New York. Authorities there abandoned the solitary confinement approach and built a prison in Auburn, New York in 1825 that housed convicts together. It was called the Auburn or Congregate Silent System. The most well-known and one of the first prisons to create this system was Sing Sing, north of New York City on the Hudson River. The prison became known for the terms up the river and the big house.
If you're going to have the men work in congregate, that is in a group setting, and the reason that was chosen here is because it was productive and cost-effective. Contracts could be let, inmates could be organized into shops. Those shops would be monitored by supervisors appointed by the contractor. The state was in favor of that because it generated revenues. Those revenues offset the cost of the institution. The state thought also it was preparing men with the skills necessary to serve in the outside world.
One of those skills was construction work. In 1825, New York State had the inmates who would be sentenced to live in Sing Sing build the prison from limestone in a nearby quarry. It took them 3 years.
This is a work that had a very strange reward. As the cell walls got higher and the cell blocks got more finished, there must have been a sense of completing one's own imprisonment. I think there was some sense of justice in that.
Sing Sing's cell block was 476 feet long, 4 tiers high, and had more than 800 cells. Cell blocks consisted of long, multi-tiered double rows of cells that were placed back to back. The cells were so small, many inmates had to walk in sideways.
Because the inmates were out of the cells during the day, and they were working in a congregate type of environment, either one of the shops or in the quarries. And at night, they would go back to their cells, and the idea with cells, you could sleep, and you didn't need to do anything pretty much else besides do that.
The cells were 3 feet wide and 7 feet deep. They had no running water and only a bucket for a toilet. For more than 100 years, it was Sing Sing's main cell block. In 1926, when bank robber Willie Sutton served time there, he wrote, "Very little sunlight penetrated the block, and the only ventilation was through the pattern of 1-inch square holes in the doors." This is all that remains of Sing Sing's original cell block today.
They realized that they could put more inmates in a given space if they stacked them on top of each other. So they built cells on top of cells.
To control the swinging grill doors from a central location at the end of the tier, there's this device at the top of the cells. In later years, a new locking technology appeared, which was less vulnerable to tampering. It let staff open 50 cells at one time by pulling a lever. It was safer and more efficient for prison staff.